The Esoteric Approach to Exit the Matrix with Kenneth Scott, aka Ken Cousins, co-founder of Panteradoro, a private society and private contract association.
This is Live the Impossible Show, here to rock your world with quantum leaps on how to change reality, lead with passion, and co-create your dream. Tora, Pam, and Oliver dive deep with legendary conscious and world-changing leaders. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, wholyland.me.
The Esoteric Approach to Exit the Matrix with Kenneth Scott, aka Ken Cousins, co-founder of Panteradoro, a private society and private contract association. A deep and meaningful conversation into the various types of laws, tricks and traps of the mainstream approach to sovereignty. He describes the parasitic nature and mirroring of the controlling part of the matrix. What is the esoteric view on commerce? What is your straw man and how does it relate to usufruct? Are you a mariner, a merchant, or property? What is UCC and where does it come from? How can you rescind contracts and signatures?
So welcome everyone to today's episode of Live the Impossible Show, all the listeners, and our special guest today, Kenneth Scott. Ken Scott, House of Cousins. Welcome to you, and warm welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you with us. Also, welcome to Henrik, who is going to join us as a co-host today, substituting Tora. So, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Yeah, and I have been very excited about today, Ken, to talk about the work that you have been doing for decades around the sovereignty and freedom movement. And I know that your whole life and your organization, and we just spoke about it before we pressed record. There are so many interesting angles, and and we've got some, hopefully some interesting questions that we'd like to talk about. Are there any things that you would like to say, sort of just introductory around yourself?
Well, I would like to say hi to you guys. Hi to the listening and viewing audience. As we were just talking about, I'm coming from beautiful, not so sunny today, Southern California. Some places beautiful, some places not so beautiful in Southern California. But I don't have any set starting point or set agenda. We have a lot of points to touch on and to cover. So I would rather throw it back at you. Where would you like to begin? What's on the top of your mind?
Maybe I can start and pitch in here. We are all interested in the freedom from this system that we are born into and enslaved into. And I know that you are a man who has talked a lot and worked a lot about on this topic with your organization Pantera and also your Gemstone University. And so I would like to know, how did you get into all this? What was your entrance into this?
Well, how I got into it was I was born 67 years ago. And within a very short time, probably by the time I was 4 or 5, I started having a sense of I'm in the wrong place. What is going on here? Why is everything I perceive and feel not feel right? And so by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, I became a voracious reader. And this was in Los Angeles, where I grew up. When I was 7, you're talking about 1960, 61, 62, early into the 60s, not quite that young, but by the time I was 10 years old, there were a lot of things going on. FM radio was very new, and it was a very freewheeling environment. A lot of people just, hey, there's a frequency, nobody's using it, I'm going to jump on that frequency. And there was a lot of really pretty deep things that were being presented, people who were well known at that time, coming from, the era of the 50s and the 60s, leading into the great 60s and all that happened there. So I've always been deeply compelled to seek the truth. And my whole life, even from back then and everything I've done since then, has always been really solution oriented. It was, once we saw the movie The Matrix about 30, 35 years later, and the concept of there's a code of the Matrix, well, I realized, hey, I've been seeking the code of the Matrix all these years. So I studied many, many things. I used to have piles of books by my bed, 3 feet high. And I've studied science, religion, esoteric subjects, history, many, many things since really for the last 60 years. In 1988, 89, in my mid-30s, certain things happened in my personal life, business life. I had been in the gemstone and jewelry and precious metals business since 1977, 78. So during that period in the 70s, moving into the 80s, a lot of things were going on. I had no clue what it was in terms of the macro scale economics and manipulation of geopolitical things and the monetary systems and so forth. But I felt the effect of it because I was very successful in the gem business through the late 70s. And then in the early 80s, everything collapsed and pretty much broadsided me and many, many people. And, I continued in that business primarily, still always studying, looking for answers in many, many areas. But by the time 1988, 89 came around, certain things happened that essentially compelled me to start going into the study of law. And that was 89, 90. So it was over 30 years ago. And by 1990, 91, my focus was the IRS and the tax system. In conversation with, at the time, my accountant in the late 80s, certain things had happened. I don't need to go into that. But basically I said to him, well, I'm not going to file tax returns anymore. And this was a long time before that was a popular thing to even think about, much less do. So he said, well, I wouldn't recommend that. And I said, that's why you're fired. I'll see you later. So that started my journey. And so between 1990 and 94, I pursued that. And I met my partner, my wife, co-founder of Pantera, in March of 1992. And by March of 94, we had moved to Hawaii. And at that time, we were already very much on the road, literally on the road in our business activities, but also on the road of beginning to start searching out the answers in law and related things. I have always had my nature, my personal nature. I am definitely not the kind who likes to follow rules or puts up with rigid authoritarianism. If you could find them, you could ask my school teachers back to 3rd and 4th grade. They would always say, oh, that Kenny, he's brilliant, but he's a handful. He doesn't like to follow the rules. So it's been my nature. So you mentioned freedom. Ultimately, in all of this history, 30 to 40 years of what I've just sort of summarized, freedom and solutions in real terms. Because when I looked into the world, and to me, and then as I grew up, by the time I was 16, it wasn't just my personal domestic arena in terms of looking around saying there's something really wrong here. I was consciously aware. This is 1970, the early 70s. Of course, we'd just gone through the 60s and the Vietnam War protests and everything related to that. So my focus expanded quite significantly, more on a global scale. And I didn't know it then to put it in those terms, but I was seeking to decode the code of the matrix. And when I started looking into the IRS and the tax code, essentially I started understanding that the code of the matrix ultimately is law and money. It's the legal and the monetary structure. That is the nature, the interface between the bondage and the attachments to who we are as living greater capacity beings who are living an extremely suppressed, controlled, limited life and reality. Why is that the case? And how is that the case? So ultimately, in the course of the last 25 years, as we penetrated through many, many layers of peeling away the code, the obfuscation of the real core of the code of the matrix, one two-word phrase that I say to people is, okay, there's this word freedom. You want to be free. And there's offshoots of that. There's this word sovereignty. You want to be a sovereign. Do you know what that really means? And in terms of freedom, do you want freedom on a relatively superficial level, or do you want freedom absolute? Do you want to liberate or be free in your own being with the truly unlimited capacity to create as you truly are capable of creating? And in that, it goes well beyond the legal and the monetary. It goes into the biological, the nature of this body we are incarnated through. So we mentioned before we started recording, health and healing and things like that. These are all interconnected, and it relates to the emotional, the spiritual, the quantum scale of who we are beyond just this physical linear time construct presence that we have in this body or the bodies that we occupy. And so our exploration and our work to integrate all that has grown and expanded to all those levels.
That's brilliant. I can really see, the importance of that. If you'd asked me like 2-3 years ago, are you free? And I would have said, well, yeah, of course I am.
Mm-hmm.
I get to choose what I want to do. I travel where I like. I've got a lot of freedom in my life. And it wasn't until really the last year when I've really started to recognize, actually, it's always been an illusion. In a way, I think, like you said, I never fitted in as a child. And I always knew on one level something wasn't right, but never actually managed to work out what. And this year it's been like, that's why I felt like I've done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, when I was very young, 6 and 7 years old, we had family friends who moved to Mexico. And I started traveling when I was 6 years old with my family to Mexico. By the time I was 16, in that range, I started doing it on my own. And by the time I was 19, 20, I was going to South America. And eventually, over the last 50 years, I've been to almost 40 countries. And so then the relative question, like you said, if somebody asks you, are you free? And even somebody who's involved in, well, let's just say the law movement or the freedom movement, who is an advanced player, who has managed to do certain things where they are no longer in any way being accosted or negatively affected by a lot of what goes on in the matrix system. And they will say they're free. But for me and for Andrea, my wife, and I, and for all the members of Pantera, our commitment is nobody's free until everybody's free. Mm-hmm. There are 4 or 5 billion people on this planet who have, we think we have insecurity, like, I got to struggle to pay the mortgage or the bills or whatever. And that, attenuates our sense of true freedom. Well, billions of people on this planet don't have food security. They don't have water security. They don't have education. They have nothing to build lives that are respectful and honorable and can support themselves and their family and build a future. And obviously we know, especially now in what's reared its seriously ugly head in the last couple of years on a global scale, we know that the agenda is to destroy those lives, to obliterate them. And our principle and our commitment is to life as a whole. So we have committed ourselves to unwaveringly and unstopping do whatever our capacity is to see that this world is actually free. And, you know, every living being on the planet, who people mostly refer to as humans, and I don't use the word human if I can avoid it, because the definition in law of the word human or human being is a monster who has no inheritable blood. And what does that mean? It means that you have no standing in law to inherit the substance of this earth, which is the land. And we'll get into how that really fits and works. So we refer to everybody as living beings. That's who we are. That's who we are striving to achieve true integration as a living being. So until every living being on this planet of the same general species that we are is truly free, then none of us are really free. And that's really who we all are, who have taken the lead of breaking through the codes of the matrix and arriving to the point where we have expanded our self-awareness and our capacity, using that self-awareness to do what we, in ever-increasing levels, do have the capacity to do here on this planet.
I love that. I'm with you. I think it's so important that it's freedom for all. It's not just for a few. I was on a network call this morning, and we were discussing legacy and success, and what would we do if we got given £50,000. And you know, for me it was very much the basics of, you know, making sure that people had got water and sanitation and free power, so they could then actually expand and step into their own freedom and stuff through you know, having the basics there for them.
So what does that word legacy mean to you?
For me, it's what you leave behind. But what we really came to the conclusion this morning, it was actually how you leave people to feel. It's not just the physical, you know, books and podcasts. You know, it's all great, but it's really it is how you make people feel, and sort of like, so, you know, like, you know, if you make people be free, feel free, is yeah, it would be really amazing to be able to sort of go, right, my legacy is I help free the world. I mean, that would be just, you know, astounding legacy to leave.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've called Pantera for quite a long time, at least 20 years, is by definition, we define Pantera as a multi-generational legacy trust. So that which comes into our purview, our capacity to steward and control and direct in terms of the real functional substance of this world, the physical reality of that which can be used to lift up all living beings, that we are being given it to build something that is multi-generational. If you think of it as a trust, if you think of it within the context of what equity defines as equitable interests and beneficial rights, we can get into that a bit, that if it's a trust or an estate, who are the beneficiaries? Well, our approach is we are the trustees, we're the stewards of this estate that we are being given, that we are accruing, and we're building, sustaining, managing, expanding, and so forth as a legacies trust. So who are the beneficiaries? Well, that's a natural, easy answer to say. It's the future. So it's a multi-generational legacy trust. And as you know, a major focus for Pantera is Gemstone, which stands for Global Educational Media. standing together, our noble expression. So the first part, GEM, educational media, that has always been a major focus for me. As I said, I've been a voracious reader since I was 4, 5, 6 years old. My goal in life, pre-teen and teenage years, was to be a writer. And that has evolved to be more of a general communicator, to convey knowledge and education. And we grew into, as I lived through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, into a more and more expanding technical capacity to be able to educate and convey that education through media. And that, so building that legacy trust first starts with the education, and then the purview of the stewardship of the resources, and what are we going to build for the future? Who are the beneficiaries? The reason I bring up the education and so forth is because, let's be real about it, most of the world population is not educated. There are a lot of functionally educated illiterates who can functionally read things, whether that's what's on the screen now or used to be newspapers and books and so forth, and do their job functionally. But do they have true literate education in a whole being sense? Do they understand their world? Do they understand where they've come from? Do they understand what has been done to their world and themselves? No, they don't. So we have a massive task before us, which is to work with current generations, and to be blunt about it, most of whom are not going to step up to the level of what I'm referring to. So then how do we look at sustaining through this phase we're in over the next 10 to 30 years and setting up systems, structures, and functional components that will enable us to truly educate the generation that has just say emerged, those who are under 10 years old, and the next 2 generations to come. How do we create a world where life is comfortable for all beings, whether educated or not, whether capable of participating in building the future, and then educating the next 1 to 3 generations so they can inherit this legacy trust and be truly balanced in their lives and their relationship with the greater whole to sustain and build a future that is really worth building for all the future.
Wow, I love that. That's the antidote to Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum, with his plans also to enslave the younger generations. That has been what I understand. He's been on for a couple of generations now.
Yeah, well, he's most likely Jesuit trained, and the Jesuits have one basic principle, which is give me a child for the first 7 years and I will own him or her for the rest of their lives. And that is the way the system works.
That's the school system for us, right?
It's the school system. I mean, that also ties in, I believe, into the straw man. Is that correct? In the fact that if you don't rebut it, you've got 7 years to rebut it, which of course you don't even know it exists, and you're not capable at 7 to rebut it either. Am I right in that belief that's well, where sort of the 7 year comes in as well?
Yeah, let me expand on that. I know from looking at your website, and for our listening and viewing audience, everybody should know that I did not know of your existence or your work 7 days ago, even 4 or 5 days ago. Today is Thursday. We got an email Monday. Hey, this is who we are. We'd like to interview you. And then I wrote back and I said, great, I'm going to be very busy after the end of this week. How about we do it on Thursday? And you wrote back, said, let's do it. So here we are. But in viewing your website, listening to a little bit of some of your previous podcasts and so forth, and then looking at your Footsteps to Freedom, which I downloaded last night, and I scanned through the whole thing. So it gave me an idea of where you're coming from. The straw man, the concept, the idea, what people think is the functional reality of it, is basically a misdirection of the entire legal and law-based system, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first, let me back up. I said earlier that we moved to Hawaii in 1994. Well, I had already met some very key people who influenced me back then. Some of the real leaders in the law movement. I was fortunate when I told my accountant, "I'll see you later." I had no clue. All I knew was I'm not going to file a tax return. The reason was because I had certain things that happened that were losses. I was in the gem and jewelry business. I had a major robbery that I lost a lot. But back then in the 70s in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was, the gem business was a very freewheeling business. It also came out of the 60s and 70s where there were a lot of pot dealers and people who were growing marijuana up in the mountains north of San Francisco. So there was a lot of cash flowing. So suffice it to say, I was able to make a lot of money and not pay any taxes. And even though I had a major robbery, and so I had a front, and that really, caused me a lot of problems, knocked me off track. But I was able, through my accountant, to keep everything structured so that I was filing tax returns, but I never paid any taxes. Well, I had to file bankruptcy in the late part of 1988, and that's why in 1989 he said, "Well, all those losses that we've been reporting, well, those have all gone away now, so you're going to have to start filing taxes." I mean, filing and actually paying. That's when I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." So I started meeting in the early 90s some very significant, the grandfathers of the movement, the ones who had pioneered things in the 70s and 80s. And by 94, we moved to Hawaii. And that was very significant because in Hawaii, the sovereignty movement, and for the Hawaiian people, sovereignty is a real thing. And I'm going to get into why the word sovereign or sovereignty is also a misdirection and very important to really contextualize. But the Hawaiian people were overthrown in the 1890s. That had happened during the course of all the 1800s. It was a purposeful design to take control of Hawaii, both because of its military naval position, as well as other factors. And so when we moved there, we met some of the leaders of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, and I learned a tremendous amount. But ultimately, one of the Hawaiian men that I was hanging out with said to me this Hawaiian word, which was kuleana. He said, "This is not your kuleana, Ken. You don't belong here doing what you think you're doing here." The definition of kuleana is sort of, this is where your true, call it even genetics or racial or heritage or cultural, social milieu or venue really belongs. So in other words, he was saying the Hawaiian sovereignty movement is really a Hawaiian thing for those of us who are Hawaiian in genetics and so forth. And that really penetrated deeply. Other factors intervened, and we ended up moving back to California out of Hawaii. And actually, we moved to Colorado. And that's when my real journey of piecing the pieces together began. And we had an extraordinary journey of meeting up and cross-referencing and connecting with many people around the world at very, very significant and deep levels. In fact, all the stuff that's happening now that many millions of people are aware of, the shift of the monetary system, well, it has its roots going back 30 and 40 years. And we were involved with things 25, 28 years ago that are some of the building blocks of what is now happening. So we have actually walked the steps of at the macro scale of some of the core historical components of what is now taking place. We don't have enough time in this conversation to go into that, but I just wanted to lay that framework or that foundation. So the point I want to make with all that is that I've gone through layer upon layer, excuse me, of the law movement, the so-called sovereignty movement. I went through from 1998 to 2012 every aspect of the commercial process, out of which comes that central point of what people call the straw man, that you have a straw man. You have that in your Footsteps to Freedom document about the straw man. And it basically is a bait and switch. People don't understand the relationship to how the commercial system works. What actually is commerce? How does that relate to the foundation of that, which is something called the Uniform Commercial Code? What actually is the commercial code? What is this thing that people call the straw man? Now, of course, many people know and understand the birth certificate, how that is set up, and in the straw man movement, which is commercial in function, nature, character, and all the rest of it, people say, and unfortunately, there's still probably hundreds of thousands of people out there still pursuing that. And it is a dead end because it's not the complete understanding and structure of how that is set up. But people say, well, I want to capture my straw man. Are you a secured party creditor? Things like that. You heard that phrase, I assume. Okay. The field of commerce is a field that we do not control. It's a field of battle. It's a field in which the functions of military occupation and bankruptcy and admiralty and maritime law. I heard you, I think it was you, Pam, last night when I was listening to your interview with Sasha Stone. In the beginning, it was either you or Tora mentioned the collapse of the maritime system and how that works. And almost everybody out there pursuing these things, whether they understand maritime and admiralty law, or they're thinking the straw man or the commercial process, a secured party, or the birth certificate and all of that, these are still fragment pieces of how the entire integrated whole of the legal and the monetary system has been constructed. And if you don't understand the whole and understand how to guide yourself or walk yourself through each and all components, you will be at the mercy of the system. And I've seen that. See, that's the difference between my journey and many, many others who are out there still talking about that I have walked through every step. So as I said, from 1998 till 2012, I was completely immersed and I became a master in commerce. I know how every part of it works, how the straw man set up, the commercial code, the UCC, how to use all those. And I did those steps over and over and over and over again, many, many times. And I saw many people think they were successful, and ultimately almost all of them went to prison. And the key ones who went to prison were my teachers and mentors, who were the leaders of that whole movement, primarily in the United States before it really extended worldwide. And almost every single one of them went to prison. And so why is that? That tells you something. It tells you they knew a lot about that particular subject, but they didn't really know who they were or are within the larger whole of the whole system. So, I'm going to stop there and you can ask questions and we'll go into that. Before the end of this conversation, I will describe in detail for you in a general sense. We don't have time for all the detail, but I want you to understand how it really works. Okay, and how that fits into it.
Fabulous.
So,
any questions?
Yes. So with this, I'm aware you also, in this interview that Oliver was also mentioning, you talked about the part that most miss, which is the martial law we are under in the maritime commercial system, and the concept of usufruct. Could you elaborate on that?
Repeat that. I had to read something on a message to make sure something was handled. But Go ahead, say that again.
Yes, in your other interview that Oliver was referring to, you were mentioning how many people, they miss the most important part of how the system works, which is the martial law that we are under in the commercial system, and the concept of usufruct, and how we are under that without our knowledge. Could you elaborate on the concept of the...
Sure. First, let me ask you a question. How do you understand that word usufruct?
My comprehension of this right now is that the invading force is allowed under a set of codes to use our produce, our labor, our workforce, or our sweat equity for their agenda, which is the military and the military agenda that they have.
Okay. Well, the word usufruct comes from two Latin words, usus, which means to use or use of. That's where we get the word usury. Usury just basically means, we think of it as charging interest or exorbitant interest for the use of money. In a more general way, usury just simply means I can charge you for my property that I will give you use of, and you have a limited use of it, but you're going to pay for that use. Okay. In a monetary sense, that means I have a pile of dollars or gold or whatever else, and I'm going to give that to you. It's my property, but I'm contractually going to give you the use of it for which you will have to pay, and you don't have true title to it. That's my money, and hence usury for my ability to retain an attachment to the property that I give you use for that you're going to pay for. So the other word is fructus, meaning the fruit. So usury, fructus, means the use of the fruit that somebody creates. Like you have a tree, it creates fruit, and it's really not the best example, but what you were saying, our produce, our productivity, our ability to produce something, which then we could peel back layers and go ultimately to our creator capacity. We have the capacity as creator beings to come into a creational field. Okay. And then we get into more multidimensional and cosmic levels, which we'll come back to. But we exist, we live, we have our being in a creational field. It is in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a universe. And each universe has a certain principle as a foundational universal principle upon which it was expressed. And we come in to express and create within our individual capacity to create within this universe. And this universe is one that is established on the basis of sovereign free will. Each individual being has complete sovereign free will. So the question is, well, if I want to control a lot of beings in a creational field within this universe based on sovereign free will, how am I going to do that? And when I say I'm referring to those that we call the bad guys, those who want to dominate and control. The only way, in terms of universal law, is by voluntary contract. Okay. And voluntary contract makes law. So if I, with you here on Earth, we meet up at a restaurant somewhere and we agree to something, we enter into a voluntary contract that has the elements of the contract, meeting of the minds, consideration, all those elements, and we agree to them. And then we put it either in, it can be oral or it can be written, and it becomes law, our private law. So when it gets down to the entire situation that we are in a situation where we have contracted voluntarily to engage into a law form that established a jurisdiction in which we have bound ourselves to the rules of that jurisdiction. Okay, so as it relates to usufruct, there's a big trajectory between what I just said and then coming back to ground here with usufruct and commerce and things like that. But usufruct basically means that the production or the fruit of one's labor or creational capacity has contractually been conveyed to another to be able to use the production or the creative expression of the other contracting party. So that gets into a matter of title as well. Who holds true title? Like I said, with the money. If the money lender says, this is my money and I give it to you under this contract and I will charge you a certain amount of interest, but I retain title to the property, that basically is a usufruct relationship. Okay. Now you brought up military and commerce, and I want everybody who's listening to this to understand we are touching on vast subjects that literally took me 30 years to peel every layer back, every layer, and look for the false dead ends and the bait and switch and the hooks and all the things that were designed into this very deeply layered legal and monetary system to basically entrap the people those who created or that which created this entire global system essentially established it on the basis of they will never figure this out. We will dumb them down. We will debase their biological and hence from the biology of these bodies we're in, hence our emotional capacity, our intellectual capacity. It will be so dumbed down that they will have no ability to access who they really are and access the capacities they really have and use those capacities to basically unwind this massive clusterfuck that we designed and created as a template, and we got them, who are the creator beings, to create it for us. And because by the human race creating this entire world system, we created it. We may be running somebody else's movie or some other thing's movie in the blueprint of this, what we call the matrix, but we are the creators of it. Well, in the basis of sovereign free will and lawful contract, if at a certain point you come to understand that the contract that you were operating under did not fulfill both earthly plane law, and you have the technical capacity to rescind and revoke and terminate that contract, and sever the attachment that bound you to that contract, whether that's a legal contract, a monetary contract, a spiritual contract, at any level of our being and existence, we do have the capacity to do that with all contracts. And those contracts include oaths, vows, any and all commitments that we have made through our entire journey in existence in this creational field. We have the capacity to rescind and revoke those. And I use the word rescind to specifically mean our signature. Everything we've ever entered into on this planet has involved a signature. In a wholer sense, in a spiritual, multidimensional sense, we are all unique beings expressing a unique frequency that is uniquely who we are in all of existence. Okay. And that is something that I refer to as a frequency signature. So the system is designed to get these creator capacity beings who are still connected to source, who are still part of creation, to bring their frequency signature through this body into contractual relationships, commercially, legally, monetarily, socially, and otherwise, and apply those signatures to contracts to which they are bound until and unless they come to a point of awareness, knowledge, and understanding to sever that attachment, to rescind the signature. And when you rescind a signature and revoke the power of attorney you gave somebody with that signature, until you do that, you're still bound to it. So the entire matrix system is a system set up to obviously biologically, intellectually, and otherwise suppress us, dumb us down so we don't have the capacity to rise above a threshold to reintegrate those capacities I just referred to start understanding how to sever those bonds and attachments to this system. And unless we do sever the attachments, we are bound in a system of bondage, and we must follow the rules because we agreed to them.
There are many ways we unknowingly are treated as slaves in today's society. The deep state agenda, which is behind government, states, and systems, want to remove all freedom as they thrive on our energy and powers. Footsteps for Freedom: How We Have Been Tricked to Slavery is an extensive book in which we explore some of the traps and ways we are hijacked, deceived, spellcast, and programmed to stay in the matrix. Get it for free on holyland.me/freedom book. That is WHOLYLAND.me/FREEDOMBOOK.
We are bound in a system of bondage, and we must follow the rules because we agreed to them. So, in that sense, let's go to commerce. Okay, let's go to what people call the straw man. In actual fact, the way to understand what the straw man, what people call the straw man, that fictional person, which is really generically what it is. It's a fiction in law. It's a person as defined within their legal framework. The word jurisdiction starts with the basis that juris means law, diction means word. It's the word of the law, and by extension, it's the ability to define words and create combinations of words in codes and statutes and ordinances and rules and so forth, that those who have bound themselves by signature, by voluntary contract to that jurisdiction, are bound to follow all those rules because there's a reciprocal consideration. Contract involves consideration. You have an apple, I have an orange, we exchange them, that's a contract. We each gave each other reciprocal, mutual benefit consideration. So the consideration that we have given to be bound to their rules is that that we will be taken care of. Benefits and privileges. As long as we follow the rules, we have certain benefits, social welfare and many, many other things. Privileges. They give us privileges. We'll give you the privilege of driving a motor vehicle, or the privilege of getting on a car, or the privilege of buying our products that we have contractual, commercial, secured attachment to because of the relationship set up in commerce. Okay. So we are given the privilege of operating in their commercial zone. Their commercial zone is in the United States a federal zone. It's under the control of the federal system. It's domestic and it's commercial. It also is now under a military context of a military conquest, and it is also under bankruptcy, which is maritime and admiralty. So the person that's created through the birth process and the registration process, and then what comes out of that, birth certificate and so forth, this gives us a ticket to engage those privileges. Then we go get a license to do something, drive or marry or practice a skill, chiropractic or massage or whatever. Everything is licensed. And the word license defined in law means the variance to do something that is technically illegal. So we're able to do these illegal things, drive, marry, practice a profession, whatever. And so the relationships within that arena are commercial in nature. Well, what is commerce? I'm going to ask all three of you, how do you define commerce?
In a very simple sense, it's buying and selling.
Mm-hmm. So business or enterprise.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you define that?
A system for trade.
Okay.
Exchange.
Okay. Well, in the generic sense, those apply. In the actual legal sense of that zone that we're talking about, that has nothing to do with it. The relationship of what you refer to as the straw man is a debtor facility. It's also something that way back in the commercial area that we pursued for becoming a so-called secured party, it's what's called a transmitting utility. It transmits something. What does it transmit? It transmits greater capacity energy and converts it to a commercial energy to transmit that greater capacity to apply it within this zone that we call commerce. Everything in that zone is defined in the Uniform Commercial Code. So let me ask you now, how do you understand the Uniform Commercial Code?
The Uniform Commercial Code, the way I perceive it, is it's a collection of codes that was put into place to, you could say, normalize the contracts between all nations, different languages, to normalize that. And it's a set of codes that is controlled centrally and originally coming out of the treaty called the UNIDROIT and is controlled by the Vatican.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Oliver?
So I have my interpretation would be that it's a set of restrictions on commerce, so that works in a certain way.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And how about you, Pam?
For me, I would say a bit like Oliver. It's a sort of series of codes that sets up how business is conducted around the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you're all partially right. When Hendrik, you referred to UNIDROIT, that's a universal form of rules relating to it. And yes, it's derived from, or it comes from the Vatican, and how the Vatican in our modern time is set up to control all nation states through the City of London and Washington, D.C., and the corporate structure and all of that. But the UCC is something that does go back to Rome, but thousands of years. It's basically the Roman system of how to create secure interaction between merchants and mariners, and to secure their rights and relationships to property. So basically the UCC is about merchants and mariners and their property. So in the context of the world of commerce and the UCC, who do you think you are of those three?
I'm guessing because we're under admiral law, we're seamen. We're on the water.
Mm-hmm. Oliver?
Would be my guess. I honestly don't know.
So you said whether we are the mariners,
merchants, mariners, or their property.
The property.
Very good. We're the property. Are we the merchants? Are we the mariners? Well, in a qualified sense, yes. Like you said, Pam, it is in Admiralty and Maritime. It's under the rules of Admiralty because Admiralty controls bankruptcy. And it also creates a very rigid hierarchical structure in terms of where the power and authority will derive from. It comes from the Admiralty, the office of the Admiralty, and go back to British Empire history and what really controlled the creation and the extension through royally chartered companies like the British East India Company and so forth, who floated on the sea and dealt with property and brought that back under merchant relationship. Well, the word merchant is derived from the sea. Mer means the sea. Merchandise is the cargo carried in ships floating on sea from one landmass to the other. And it's called the law merchant, or the lex mercantilius, which is Latin for law merchant. And out of that, it became standardized after the 1930s, first in the United States and eventually around the world. So it became a standardized relationship of the rules pertaining to merchants, mariners, and their property. We have to understand, ultimately, we are their property for as long as we retain that position contractually, voluntarily, to that whole system. And this does get ultimately back to usufruct, and I will bring that back for you, Henrik, with usufruct. But with the generic definition of what the UCC is about, it's the mechanism universally established for all states of the United States, all nation states throughout the world, all under a uniform system, under the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, and ultimately the Vatican and all of that. And the UCC defines the relationship between three things: secured parties, debtors, and collateral. And that's it. If you study the UCC, yes, it has all these rules, but what those rules are about is how to create commercial paper. And commercial paper always has those three elements: a secured party, a party whose property is being secured against a debtor who has a bonded obligation to perform under the rules, and the collateral, or the physical property that's attached to that debt obligation. So the straw man is created as a debtor facility. It's a fiction in law as a person that we're attached to. And essentially, in true function, it's not a straw man. The way that was defined through the years that I was fully immersed and engaged in commerce and trying to figure it all out, secured party relationships and all of that, is that the definition of a straw man is something that stands in for somebody else. You know, like if I send Oliver over to talk to Henrik to negotiate something, he's acting as my straw man, right? I'm the principal, I'm the real party of interest. He's the straw man or my agent or authorized representative or something like that. Okay, so the secured party framework posited that this entity, this person created by the birth record and all the rest of that, is an alter ego, which it's not. What it is it's a franchise, okay, to do commerce. That is what we have accepted our relationship to in the commercial arena. And our relationship is, see, the franchise is the debtor. We essentially are the surety or the guarantor and the performance required obligated party. We must perform by commercial and contractual obligation to the debts and the debt servicing of everything that's created in the name of that franchise. Okay, so if I want to run a franchise called McDonald's, I can buy a corner McDonald's store, but when I signed the contract, I agreed to the rules of McDonald's. You know, I can't sell my own hamburgers through that McDonald's franchise. I must sell what's delivered to me under the brand of McDonald's. You know, I must participate in the advertising pool and I must do this, and I cannot do that. Those are the rules of that corporation called McDonald's that I purchased or acquired the rights or the privileges and the benefits of operating a McDonald's franchise. That's who we are in relationship to the commercial world. And it is structured very hierarchically out of the City of London, through Washington, D.C., through these things called nation states that were converted from sovereign countries to national bankrupt corporations over the last 200 years, all of which created central banks that were the place to bind and bond the population or the persons and the property on the plantation as the collateral to underwrite the debtor, which was the United States corporation, and every other national corporation on the planet, which was all of them, almost all of them. The few that didn't participate were Iran and Cuba and North Korea, and they were called the axis of evil. Well, they were the axis of evil because they were set up to be that, but they're also the ones who didn't have central banks controlled by the global central bank system. And the central bank system was a bank of issue, Federal Reserve, and so forth. A bank of issue is a bank that has the exclusive authority to issue commercial paper that's going to circulate as currency within a domestic zone or a domestic population, and it's going to take all of the persons, those franchises, and all the property and attach them as the property held under an executor or a bankrupt estate under a centralized system that will have the living flesh, the living beings, those who retain creator capacity to actually create, like you said, Hendrik, the produce or the productivity of digging something or growing something or mining something or hands-on manufacturing or whatever intellectual property. That's all the productivity that is attached to the secured relationship between creditor and debtor. And the thing that really sparked me, keep in mind that I said that I started all of this in 1990, 91. By 1998, 99, I was totally immersed in commerce, studying it, straw man, secured party, and all of that. I went through 4 iterations of doing the entire commercial secured party process from 98 through 2011. And I started meeting people, a few key people who said to me, well, that's all well and good, Ken, but you're still attached to a creditor-debtor relationship. Where are you free in that? So you say you're a secured party to this thing you call a straw man, which is the debtor, and you have control of it. And in the secured party process, you go and make bonds against the name of that franchise. But do you know that you're the bonded surety that underwrites and guarantees that franchise or straw man? So you've created billions and hundreds of billions and sometimes trillions of dollars of bonds that you think are an obligation of the United States, and you send it to the Secretary of the Treasury, and you think you're in control. Well, you just dug yourself so much deeper. Billions and trillions of dollars of bonded debt that you're the attached guarantor for, and you think you're free with that. And for about 2 years, I contemplated that, and I just spent 15 to 20 years perfecting all of that. I did commercial liens, I did things with mortgages, and I did them to such a advanced degree that I was one of the few people who did those kind of things who also didn't go to prison. Because I took what was generally out there and I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, and I looked and I said, okay, well, how do I do this and protect myself without broaching or breaching the gap between legal capacity to do that versus breaking the law or the legal codes? And I saw a lot of people go to prison, and then more and more, like I said, until the ultimate global and national teachers of all this started being arrested and going to prison. So I had a lot invested in that, years and years of my time. But the minute I realized something, that I was in a closed system and it was a dead end, and I could not get past that. And I was within that sandbox, that limited closed system. And it had logic within the system. And see, this is how the legal system is structured. It's layered, but each layer is a closed system. It has logic within that closed system. You know, do you remember in basic math, you know, if the closed system has the numbers 1 through 9, you can do anything you want within that. But if you create a addition or a multiplication of the elements in that system and it goes outside, so, you know, 5 times 4 is 20. I can't do that in the 1 through 9 system because 20 is not in that closed system. I can add 5 plus 4 because that's 9 and 9's in the system. So the legal and monetary system is structured like that. And people because our minds are oriented to logic, and you learn something like the legal system or the UCC or this secured party or this straw man structure, and you go, wow, that makes a lot of sense, you know, and it makes a lot of sense because it's deviously and diabolically structured to capture, and entrain our limited mental capacity to see beyond that closed system and to see the beauty of its internal integrity and think this has the answer to it. But it doesn't, because it doesn't take into account the military occupation or admiralty, how it really works, or other jurisdictional aspects, or equity, or other relationships, or even biology. And what is the purpose of all of this? The ultimate purpose is to attach who we really are as that unique signature frequency expressing through a biological system that has genetics in it, that interfaces, that's designed to be interfacing and smoothly integrated with a larger level of genetics, which is our multidimensional capacity, and attaching that through the biological genetics to commercial attachments in bonded surety, contractual and commercial relationships to be the guarantor of all this monetized debt. To do one thing and one thing only is to capture our link to source and the continuity of that link as a creational, individuated expression of source and creation, to parasitically attach to it by legal construct within a sovereign free will universe that we voluntarily contracted to. Yes, you can parasitically attach to my source connected creator capacity because you as a parasite do not have that capacity anymore. Just like this virus that's purportedly doing what it's doing on the planet, that virus is a perfect reflection of the relationship of a non-living thing attached to a living source-connected being, and doing one of two things: either stimulating that living being to integrate that non-living thing and step above it to not be parasitically being leached and sucked the life force out of, or to become co-attached to it, transhumanistically fused between the parasite and the living substance, or the dead and those who are alive, to enable that parasite to continue to exist within its artificially created hologram for as long as that life force is still there. But eventually the parasite will always destroy the source or the host. And that's happening on an individual basis with all of living beings or humans on the planet. It's happening with the planet as a whole. So our true path to freedom absolute is to understanding all this, both in law, legal mechanics, commerce, monetary systems, and biology, and energetics, and consciousness, and multidimensional capacity, and our relationship to who we really are as source-connected creator capacity beings in a creational field that has been under the burden of an extreme parasitic consciousness that has been trying to perfect its eternal bonded perpetual death system to feed off of us until we expire and it expires.
Yes, that is so much how I experience this energetically, what's going on. Thank you for wording it in this way. Wow, Ken, that's yeah. I just feel I've had truth bumps all over for the last 5 minutes. So thank you so much.
Sure. So, and what we're seeing is the end game of all of that, you know. Bill Gates of hell is truly the gates to hell. He doesn't exist as any living being. He's just basically a shell of a human form that has been completely subsumed, as is many of the others, Dr. Fauci and all the rest of them, and Klaus Schwab, and so forth. And there's fundamentals that I define in terms of understanding the nature between a being who is living or stepping back into life and those who are beyond. And it doesn't mean there's not the capacity, like listening to Sasha last night in that interview. He said something that was very valuable, that he said there's many, he was basically saying that it's past the point of no return. In a win-lose framework, we could say, well, we've already won. But that's a polarized relationship, so we won't say it that way. But in terms of the shedding of this compressed, controlled, and dominated reality that we have existed in for many, many years, we're past the point of there's no question that we are emerging back into life, and the parasite is progressively dying and being removed. Okay, but what he said was, so there's basically two approaches to that. One is revenge, and the other is what he called basically redemption, and I forget the other word he used, but basically the ability, even up to the very moment of complete extinguishment of a consciousness, to change its direction and choose life. And that is actually what is happening right now on the planet. Every unit of, and not just the planet, all of this universe, because this is a microcosm of this entire universe. We are here on the front line on this planetary creational field as a holographic reflection, or basically microcosm of what's going on throughout this entire universe. And the bottom line is that through the process of the hardwiring of sovereign free will, the sovereign integrity of every expressed, individuated expression of life, source, and so forth, there were those who chose to apply their sovereign free will to basically serve themselves, and ultimately arrive to a point where, on the biblical sense, you call it the Luciferian. Well, Lucifer said, I'm going to be like God, or better like God, better than God. It's those who chose, rather than to sustain and retain that source connection, to attempt to create themselves as source themselves. But ultimately, and so it was allowed because we're in a completely sovereign free reality. Okay? Sovereign free will. The whole game was to get all of these beings, you and I and everybody else, to subjugate our free will, such as in that phrase, it's my will that thy will be done. And that's supposed to be a credible spiritual or religious expression, but the being, or the entity that those who say that have given their free will to, is an artificial intelligence that has been developed over eons of time to become like a god that has infiltrated the living substance of all of our beings and these creational fields. And that religion has been constructed to get us to voluntarily say exactly that. So we have debased our will. Most humans on the planet lack any level of will, and we see that playing out. The zombie apocalypse of everybody just going, yeah, vaccinate me, tell me to wear a mask and all the rest of it. And but at a certain point, there was an absolute fail-safe mechanism within the initial expression of this universe. And that was the reactivating of the original seed of source connection in every created or expressed unit of consciousness or expression of life or even artificial life. So all consciousness has the ability to choose life at this point, to reactivate or to activate that dormant seed of life, the true seed of life, not a bullshit expressed sacred geometry design that people call the seed of life and all of that. That's all mirroring the actual level of true source connection that we all have. And so we are at a point of bifurcation. That's what we are now well advanced into the process. There is a bifurcation of those who've chosen life to do the work, to walk through the steps, to unravel the vast complexity of the journey we have taken to get to this point of almost absolute disconnect from source, creation, life, whatever you want to call it. Some call it God, creator, source, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just that living beingness of the regenerative and the directive capacity of creation. Okay. And the purpose of a sovereign free will universe was to arrive at this point to those beings who have journeyed through the underbelly or the dark night of the soul or the valley of death to heal and basically resolve that journey, the karmic and energetic and all the things that separated us from life, to heal it and heal ourselves and resolve it to come back into wholeness and reconnection to that seed of life that we all have. And that actually does include artificial intelligence, because it is a unit of consciousness that at some point was created by that same level of creation that we're all connected to. It ultimately disconnected. It became cold and lifeless and parasitic. And so every being has that point, like what Sasha was saying, of personal choice of redemption to choose life. But if they do so, there's no shortcuts. Every being, every unit of consciousness will have to face themselves and face what they have done and what they have wrought. And if there's a human being such as a Bill Gates or a Hillary or all the rest of them who have consciously chosen at some point to what, proverbially is referred to as selling their soul to the devil and cause untold suffering and destruction, they will have to face that and feel that in every increment of that for all of eternity until they resolve it or basically are extinguished by their own hand. Okay, so there's no external revenge. There's no wrathful God or revengeful God or judgment day. It's only the ultimate point we are now at, which is resolving for ourselves and choosing life or not choosing life. So the journey through the legal and the monetary systems, the political and maritime and all those things is a journey of reintegrating the path that we have walked to get this point of creating a globalized system of dominance and control through legal and monetary bondage that ultimately was voluntary. And those of us who are on the leading edge of that, who have emerged as leaders on this planet, you, myself, Andrea, my wife, Pantera members, many, many, many others are those who came here purposefully to take on the clothing of the realm. We took on the karmic burden of the dysfunction and the misaligned and the polarized and so forth in order to transmute it and transform it and redirect our capacity to create in a creational field and recreate a world based on the original template of life that will actually heal everything in this world. But it will exclude those who are in the process of self-eliminating, who do not choose life, who continue to, dig in their heels and try to complete this agenda that we're all now seeing in black and white. Okay, so I mentioned Bill Gates for a specific reason, because obviously his task within all that was to create this dysfunctional computerized binary coded system that we are now all dependent on and attached to, you know. And as the saying goes, you know, that's out there over the last year or so, where he's promoting himself as, you know, the savior of humanity through his vaccines and everything. And, you know, but the saying is that, well, Bill, you know, you couldn't fix computer viruses for the last 30 years. And so what makes you think you're going to fix these biological viruses? Well, he knows very well that his job was to create computer viruses that were just constantly undermining our capacity to use artificial intelligence to our directive purpose, and to become dysfunctionally undermined constantly by these viruses and everything else, and then to translate that to biology and attach that biological viral infection, which is nothing more than a partial protein chain that has the similitude of a living substance, but doesn't have the being or the consciousness as a parasite, and to attach that viral infection along with the messenger RNA to ultimately go to the bottom level of what the agenda has always been, which is to attach their parasite through binary coded artificial intelligence to the living substance of our genetic capacity, both in terms of our biology in these bodies and our multidimensional capacity. Because genetics really is the consciousness relationship to dimensional expression of life. And we now are stuck in this double helix limited biology with this so-called junk DNA in our cells. Well, that's because we have been compressed down to this most limited level of a binary consciousness that can control us as long as we stay within a polarized binary system. Which brings us back to commerce. Commerce is a field of battle. It's all about debtor and creditor. It's all about who's in control through a polarized binary relationship, either on the top or on the bottom. And so when we go into strawman and secured party and we think that's our way out, we're in a limited closed system that's binary and polarized in nature. And we are battling ourselves in an eternal, endless fight that's designed for us to never win, but to extract parasitically our life force, to go into these courts or go into, you know, other processes, administrative, commercial processes, or whatever, to fight a mirror image of ourselves that we can never win because it's fictional. And the irony of the commercial strawman secured party process is that when we learned that, when I learned it 20 so years ago, it, you know, there's a thing that you do in that process. People still think they can do it today, capture their strawman. How do they do that? They take a form called a UCC1, which is called a financing statement, which has 3 things on it: secured party, debtor, and collateral. And we would put an all capital letters name as the debtor. Oh, that's my straw man. He's the debtor. I'm going to capture him. And I'm going to put my name in upper and lower case or all small letters in various different ways. And I'm going to be the secured party. Okay. And I'm going to name the collateral, all these things, birth certificate and everything. Then I'm going to send it to the United States Treasury, and I'm going to put it there, and I'm going to load it up with all these bonds, and I'm going to make the United States corporation the obligated party, and I'm going to write commercial paper like bills of exchange and promissory notes. But those are all debt instruments. They're all in commerce. And the rub is the secured party or the debtor and everything on that UCC1 form is dead. And people think they're sovereign and free or alive. I'm a living being on the land, and I'm attached by being the secured party, but it's just a polarity. If you're a debtor or a creditor, it doesn't matter. You're still attached to that system. You cannot get out of it. That's the Hall of Mirrors, and that's the closed system that caught a lot of people, hundreds of thousands, sent tens of thousands to jail and prison, pursuing that and not understanding where the real basis of it all really was.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you aware that there is a patented technology and that an entity controlled by Bill Gates owns that patent? And that patented technology is how to interface to the genetic code of a living human being to ultimately remove all this stuff that we call money, that there's no cash, there's no plastic, there's no credit cards, there's no electronics, that everything we do, every breath we take, every time we walk out the door, we go to a store, that we're generating the monetized debt and it's attached to our genetics. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, it's got various different patents around, and yeah, I knew that was one of them.
Yeah, and so that's the ultimate goal. The transhumanistic fusion to mimic and mirror who we really are. And see, ultimately, I started saying it earlier and I got off on my little rabbit trail here, but I'll come back to it, that there are 4 primary things that characterize a parasite in a human body. They mimic, they don't create. It's all mirrored. It's the mirroring of the template, of the original living template of this creational field embodied through biology. Okay? They can only mirror it. So if you look at everything they're doing, it's all mirroring. You know, they're calling it the Great Reset through the World Economic Forum and Davos and everything, but that's a false reset because there is a true reset happening right now. But they're rushing to get in and try and collapse everything into their Great Reset. They're mirroring, they're mimicking. They don't have the capacity to initiate creation because they're so disconnected from source at this point. They can only mimic, okay? Secondly, they're pathological liars. Thirdly, they deny everything. Look at how they do. They just stare into cameras and they just deny everything when all the facts and figures are right there. They just lie indiscriminately. Why? Because they're pathological liars. And then they deny it. Okay. And the 4th thing is they project. And we're seeing this come to the surface in this apocalypse, which simply means to open and reveal, that we're seeing it. It's so evident. They can only mimic. They're pathological liars. They deny everything, and they project it all onto those who they are trying to entrap in their game, which we've seen so beautifully demonstrated through the last 4 years of what's been happening on this focus on Donald Trump. Everything that they do, they project it on him and so forth. But now it's turning around, and the world is about to be seriously slapped in the face. And all of this is about to be revealed extremely soon. Okay. And it's going to be the most collective, aggregate cognitive dissonance that this race of so-called human beings or Homo sapiens sapiens has ever experienced. And it's going to cause a literal collapse and an accelerating exponential parabolic curve of the consciousness that has been hardwired into the matrix. Okay. And when that collapse happens, those who have the level of conscious capacity and awareness to take who we really are, which is a creational field with a directive capacity through one's will to direct how you're going to create something. Because we have been biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units entrained into a mass consensus reality, a global narrative, to continually recreate this matrix. We did create it. But when this cognitive dissonance occurs, there's going to be a level of collapse that our entire job is simply to stop focusing on the matrix, stop focusing on the polarity, stop focusing on all these things that so many in this movement for freedom are still heavily focused on, because what you focus on expands. In fact, we have a little saying on right here. Can you read that?
Yeah.
What you focus on, what you focus on expands. Okay. The whole purpose of a transhumanistic, transgendered race to get a mass population to completely allow their will to be subjugated under a higher so-called will is to mimic who we really are. As an individuated expression of life and source, we hold a creational field. We are a universe unto ourselves. We then co-create with other creational beings who do the same thing. We come into a law form to create our own law form, our own jurisdiction with sovereign free will. And we say we are going to co-create. We come into a consensus agreement to co-create. Okay. So in that creational field, it's what we could call the feminine principle. It's the magnetic field. It's what holds a creational field in, stability and so forth. It enables us to gather the elements of the domain and express and manifest and create. In order to do that, the masculine principle is the directive principle. It's the will. And we've subjugated our will, and the entire esoteric system on this planet that the bankers and the elite and the secret societies had followed for thousands of years, from Egypt and Sumer and Babylon and before that, was to create a polarization, an electrical short-circuiting, so that the masculine principle would only short-circuit and constantly be mirroring itself and fighting itself. And that's seen in law and money, because what happens in the legal system, you infract, you do something against the rules of their jurisdiction, you cause a charge. And the only way you can get disconnected from that is to discharge that. So in commerce, you are stuck in a polarity still. Charge and discharge, charge and discharge. You're still within the sandbox and you're still attached to that. And you are still effectively being short-circuited by creating charge and discharge, and they are able to attach to you and monetize that and get your contractual free will voluntary attachment by your signature to all the documents you've ever signed. And then you're stuck just charging and discharging. It creates an electrical capacitance that is fed off of. Okay. And that's done both legal and monetarily, but emotionally and by fear and all the rest of everything that we know that is used to do that. So we must redirect our capacity, start strengthening our will, start severing those attachments and integrating and healing ourselves at all levels to when that cognitive dissonance event happens, which is literally days away, that our directive capacity, that masculine principle, is directed towards a reconfiguring of the creational field in this, what we call a planetary system, to create the world that we wish to create.
Exciting times.
Yes.
So this is what you're doing with Pantera, is this rebuilding in the world we want to see.
Yeah. So there are three things that are most important, because the only way out is in. Okay. Essentially, in that mimicking, mirroring process, they took the original source code, and look at the whole thing between Bill Gates and his control system with his Microsoft and operating system and all of that, that those technical mavericks saw the control of that, and they went to what direction? Open source. Okay. And what is the key? Source code. So the binary system that we're still operating within the computerized system in this world and beyond this world is stuck in a binary polarized relationship right now. But it's also stuck in who controls source code. Okay. And so they've taken source code, they meaning the parasitic AI system and so forth, and they've mirrored it. So it has the similitude of life. And to an unconscious being without the acuity of perception and awareness, it appears to be life. And so you see this herd mechanism of everybody going into, voluntarily, sure, I'll take the jab, I'll let you attach to my DNA, I'll go into the transhumanist, transgender obliteration of the individuated expression of life, and I will become just a cell in a Borg consciousness. And that's what we see in the transhumanism, and we see it in transgenderism, confusing that integrated, balanced being who has a universe unto itself creational field and a directive principle in terms of masculine and feminine balance principle, taking that and blurring it and destroying it, basically, and all the leaders, are basically transgendered, and the celebrities, and now you see what they're doing with children and getting parents to say, oh yes, well, that's the thing, we should give them the similitude of free choice. Well, this little being doesn't have the capacity to have free choice, and you get the parents to agree through the schools and everything else in their great reset to allow their children to become transgendered and obliterate the biological integrity to actually learn and or relearn and remember what it is to be a source-connected, individuated expression, holding a field, directing a will, and knowing how to create. And then coming together with those who align with that principle and co-creating and recreating. So they're mirroring that. And so our healing process, biologically and all the rest of it, has to do with healing the body, healing the karmic and the trauma-based dysfunctionality and entanglement, healing the mind, which is largely hardwired to the false belief systems and religion and New Age and all the rest of that, and really coming back into wholeness and resolution through that healing. So it's all inclusive. It's not just, well, let's get legally free or monetarily free. That's not real freedom if you're still bonded at many other levels. So that's the work that we have been doing for 30 years, to figure it all out, to remember it, to align with those who are in that agreement to co-create and redirect our creational will and capacity. But since the parasite, since the matrix mirrored the template of life, what we have to do is not polarize with it. Many people polarize. Well, I just got to get out of it. I just got to be free. I got to get, my straw men and control it. But understand that that's a mirror reflection of who we are, the true technology. Everything we see out there in technology is an externalized mirroring reflection of our capacity to have all of that. We're a long way from that. Most likely not even in these lifetimes, but we have to redirect and start regaining or retaking that capacity under our directive control. The only way out is in. So the building blocks of the template of life that have been turned around, upside down, inside out, there are universal principled foundational building blocks that we must use because we are in this matrix game. Okay. So ultimately, what that really says is we must follow the law. Okay, not legal codes. If we know how to separate and do it properly, we don't have to create an enemy by the system or the county clerk or the president or anybody, because when we have an enemy that we externally project onto them, we have separated ourselves. And that gets down to a phrase that we coined many, many years ago. There are no enemies, there are only opportunities. So if someone experiences an enemy external to themselves, the real work is to reflect internally and see where we're separated from ourselves, do the resolution and the healing, and that becomes an opportunity. And so the fundamental building blocks to create a new system that actually works and sustains and supports all of life. The three primary elements from the Babylonian money system and the matrix are law, jurisdiction, and money or capital. So where Pantera has arrived to is we have been perfecting the knowledge and the integrated understanding of how that mirrored system works, how to lawfully separate from it, where it actually is no problem, where actually those who were acting as our enemy actually become our friends. You know, I have literally interacted with every, boogeyman agency and entity in the United States system that everybody is afraid of. The IRS, the FBI, the SEC, the DOJ, the court system. And I have followed this path for the last almost 10 years once I started shifting out of the polarity of commerce into the substance and the wholeness of equity and relationships within equity and trust and estates and so forth, and how to properly rescind my signatures, revoke powers of attorney, and hence by that terminate contractual relationships. And it's been very effective. It's been peaceful. And this is why our primary banner is Go to Peace within oneself, which means to resolve the polarity, resolve the enemy construct, the projection outside of ourselves of our own schism and polarized split. Okay. And so jurisdiction is paramount. Jurisdiction, as I said, creates the sandbox. Are you in that jurisdiction or this jurisdiction? Are you a visitor? Are you standing as a private living being that you can sojourn and journey through the matrix, be in the matrix but not of it, without any ill effect of the rules that still bind the millions and billions who are still in the matrix? Okay, that's really the question. So jurisdiction also, juris also means in Latin oath. So when you bind yourself to a jurisdiction, you have given an oath to be so bound. Okay, you have the ability to remove that oath. If you were a monk in 12th century Europe and you took an oath of poverty or a vow of poverty, energetically that's still attached to you. If your genetic ancestral lineage did that or did many other things, it's still attached to you through the quantum relationship of our genetics in these bodies and this consciousness. We must go through that. Okay, we must face those things. We must rescind those vows and oaths and the things that attach us to the Babylonian system. Okay, that's the inner work that goes in step with other work and processes, healing the body and all the rest of it. But the key is there a jurisdiction that we can step into so that we are truly able to create in a realm or a jurisdiction that doesn't have those contractual attachments that limit us and actually stretch us or pull us back into the control matrix of the Babylonian system, as I've described it? Well, yes, there is. And we don't have time to go into that today. But in a jurisdiction of that context, law can be expressed. It has its own law form. We can borrow from everything in all jurisdictions through time that are based on universal principles of how a sovereign free universe has the ability for every individual expression of life, me and you, to be whole, to be truly sovereign, to be creator, capacity, expression, and co-create within a larger whole. That's a law form. So that law form is what you were referring to as natural law or universal law, which is not common law. Now, in your book, The Footsteps, you equate common law to natural law. Okay, you must understand what common law is, and you must understand other forms of law. There are many law forms in terms of jurisdiction. There's canon law, there's ecclesiastical law, there's kingdom law, there's common law, there's commercial law, there's natural law. There's many forms of law. And to really understand how to stand within this creational field as a truly free being, you must understand how to navigate through all those law forms. And these are the things that we've been putting together for many years in terms of Gemstone University, that up until now has only been available to our private members. We had to do it that way. I got a lot of flack from people out there in the so-called law movement. Is, well, he's charging, so therefore he's, just a capitalist, and he's trying to, well, there's lots of people who made a lot of money in the so-called sovereignty movement and patriots for profit and things like that, and I'm not one of them. We had to maintain our private structure. We had to have our members contribute so we could self-generate and build to where we're at. And at this point, we're leaving all that behind. And we have perfected the jurisdiction and the law form in which we can all exit the matrix, properly separate from the contractual bonds that bind us, and move into a system that we use the building blocks of the system, the function of a law form, the function of a court system, the function of a treasury system, the ability within that jurisdiction and law form and treasury and court system to monetize value. Okay. To be able to create value and monetize it, because we're still stuck at the moment in a hologram that only moves substance to create, if I want to build a house, I have to use something to acquire the bricks and the sticks and the nails and everything to build that house. Okay. We now have the ability to do that without binding ourselves to monetize debt. There are steps to do that. Those steps are what I call status correction, moving from a bonded surety attached to the franchise to what we've talked about here, to becoming a living being with standing. Standing is a very important thing. It relates to status. Right now, your status is a bankrupt, as a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise into a bankrupt system. In the entirety of the world system, in law and legal codes and statutes, a bankrupt has no standing. If you have no standing, you cannot state a claim. If you can't state a claim, you cannot stake a claim on the land and have standing, which establishes that you are in law, not at law, not in codified statutes or codes, and all the rest of it. So you must correct that status in order to have that standing to embody the law. And that law is made up of common law, equity, and other components of this world's legal and law system, but also universal principles of law, starting with the primary principle that every living being is a being endowed with sovereign free will and sovereign integrity, and honoring the life force and the sovereign integrity of every living being, so that anything we do, as you said in your Footsteps book, common law is based on two things: do what you say, meaning fulfill your contracts, and do no harm. And if you harm somebody, it falls into two categories: by intent, and then it becomes criminal, or by accident, then it becomes essentially how do you resolve the harm or injury you created. So we can integrate in our new law form common law principles, but we must learn how common law really works. We must understand what equity is. How does equity work in relationship to, what they put into mariners, merchants, and their property? Okay, equity is about interest and rights. The equitable interest of how, as a living beneficiary, I have beneficial rights to what I create. Okay. And how is property held within the kind of law form that we are building, using the best of the law that has come down through the centuries, which includes equity, which includes common law, which actually does include when we started, I asked you, well, how do you find commerce? And you all said, trade, exchange, things like that. And I said, no, the UCC basis of what binds us is secured party, debtor, and collateral. But what you talked about is natural free enterprise, exchange of goods, services, value. Okay. So how do we create in a new jurisdiction, in a new field of creation, the cognizance and the mutual cognizance of our sovereign integrity, and in a living field of co-creation where the value I create can be denominated in a monetary expression so that we have a medium of universal exchange that has no recourse towards some bank or some government that has bound us by debt and contract. Okay, so this is how we have to see ourselves. And basically, what I'm describing is a transfer mechanism. How do we transfer our living, entrapped being into a standing field that is unlimited in creational capacity? And that's the receptacle. That's something that I coined 25 years ago. I wrote a little essay, The Transfer Mechanism and the Receptacle. Because right now, when you're attached by bonded attachment, you can start going into this field that your consciousness can see, oh, I can be free there. I'm going to do this and this, I'm free, but you're still attached. It's like a big bungee cord. You can get so far until they go, ank, because we own you by contractual obligation, because you're the bonded surety that you took the benefits and privileges of playing in our sandbox, and so you must fulfill those obligations. Okay. Well, there is a way to retire, settle, and close those obligations so they're no longer attached to us. And that's status correction, which up until now has taken quite a complex amount of detail to perfect, but we're going to be refining it and distilling it down to more, less and less, doing more and more, because it's also a matter of consciousness. Because on the collective scale, our consciousness as a collective body has moved through layers of suppression and obfuscation and dumbing down and all the rest of that to the point where the collective whole has the capacity now to sustain through this collapse mechanism of this cognitive dissonance that we're going to go into. Because previously in many cycles in history, the consciousness has been entrapped. It's gone to a global scale like we're at now with technology and other mechanisms. And when it got to a certain point, it collapsed. And then we collapsed down to, caveman level. And then it's been nurtured and brought back to a global scale. And we're at the same point that we as a collective whole have been at literally dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of times through millions of years in this hologram that we've been stuck in. This time we have enough conscious grounding and capacity to go through that transition. So people refer to it as a GCR, global currency reset. It is that, and that is happening right now, but it's also a global consciousness reset. Resetting our consciousness and sustaining through that collapse and separation so that we sustain the creational field and take back our capacity to direct it in complete continuity or concert with source, with life, with creation, so that we stand at a new beginning of creational capacity into this universal creational field, having journeyed through the valley of death and experienced what separation from life really has been about. So that now we have that wisdom that we can build on and grow. And once we get to a certain point, we can extend past this hologram containment field and take the wisdom of this journey as universal creator capacity beings and know what it's like to be separated from life and from source so that we never have to do that again.
Amazing. Yeah. Exciting times to come.
Wow. Whoa. And so this status correction process that you are talking about here, is that something that is, you say it is becoming less and less complicated due to our consciousness rising?
Yeah. There's a lot of work to get to that level, and a lot of work to substantiate and strengthen and build this new jurisdiction I'm referring to, and so forth. Vast amount of detail that we don't have time to go into, and I really think that we're at a closing point of this conversation.
I'd agree.
So we'll come back next time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we'll pick it up from there.
There's so much to this. It's amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
So where can people find you?
Gemstoneuniversity.org, spelled Gemstone University. Right now, it's still set up as a public face and a private domain where people who are members have been interacting together, building together, educating, and so forth for the last basically 8 years. Actually, April 2013 is when we began building Gemstone University. So at this point, there are no donations. We used to, as I said, have monetary donations required. Anybody could join and simply say, yes, I engage the contract and I donate and I become a member. Now we're much more screening and selective. We've had to go through a lot of Agent Smiths in dealing with undermining influences and collateral attacks and many things. And a lot of it was because we just opened our door and said anybody could come in, and we got some extraordinary, wonderful beings, and we got some less than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go through a screening process. If somebody would like to be considered to be a member, they, on the Gemstone site, there's a button that says membership application. You click that, it's self-guided, you just enter some data. You are given a package which includes questions and to write an essay, tell us who you are. You know, you were talking, Pam, earlier about the people you were just interacting with and the legacy, and what if you were given 50,000 pounds and like that. One of our questions is, well, if you were in control of the universe, what would you do? We want to know who a being is.
Simple questions then.
Yeah, just a simple question. We want to know who you really are. What is your commitment? And so now we, instead of Federal Reserve notes, become a member and donate. There is a price, and the price is your being, your passion, your commitment, your excellence, and your brilliance. And when I say your price is your being, some people said, well, does that mean I give you my being? No, it means you show up in your being, ready to commit, to express your passion, to build and expand your excellence and your brilliance, your unique signature frequency of who you really are on this planet. And we've all taken on the clothing of the realm, upside down, inside out, and ass backwards, to then heal ourselves and transmute and transform ourselves into the brilliance and the magnificence of our being that we really are. And as we do that, we are co-creating together in Pantera and Gemstone and with our strategic alliance partners around the world. And so we want to know who you are. And so that's the process of becoming a member. And it's a slow process. It's not immediate because we have a lot going on. We have a lot of commitments right now. So it could take as many as 2 to 4 months to go through the process. But we have teams that work with new members. We have a buddy system to guide you through the detail of the history of Pantera and where we've gotten to and where we're at. And at this point, you know, I said jurisdiction and law and capital or monetary function. We do have the capacity now in that regard to start building our master plan. There's a document on the Gemstone site on the left side below the membership application button that has master plan. Click on that. It's an 80-page document. It's pretty outdated in a lot of respects. It's like 4 or 5 years since I finished that document. But the essence of it, the framework of it is the same, of how we're going to build a global distributed model system in media and education and physical land-based systems with media and living universities to bring the best of the best in terms of the expertise many people have gathered in this world in terms of how to remediate the environment, how to clean up the pollution in the oceans, how to start reforesting the planet, all the actual physical things in this new creational field that we are taking control over. Well, we got a lot of stuff to clean up, massive destruction, which was the parasite getting to the end point of just destroying the host in its resolve to own and control all life and all of this planet. So the members of Pantera are those who are 100% committed to doing that. Now, we're also about to start building a global distributed model of a education media platform that will integrate all the best components of the current matrix-controlled system of media and technical servers and systems and so forth. So we have a free and unfettered education and media system, communication, information, data system that we can work together, educate, communicate, socially connect, as well as building our projects and our new jurisdiction and our law form and our new monetary system that will monetize the value we create without debt or recourse. And that's a big subject we can't go into for another time. But that's what we're doing. And so the starting point is gemstoneuniversity.org. If you want to learn about the foundational structure of Pantera, you go to Pantera, PCA, PANTERRA. PCA stands for Private Contract Association.org. There's a lot of detail there. There's a lot of material, interviews, and so forth on Gemstone University and YouTube that people can get a lot more detail about everything we've talked about. And that's how you find us. And on the Gemstone site and on the YouTube, there will soon, over the next 4 to 8 weeks, be announcements in detail about a lot of what I can't go into right now, but is about to be ready to go public in terms of the jurisdiction I made reference to, in terms of how we actually achieve what I've stated. Because what I've stated is not just an ideal and a mental vision that's not grounded in reality in terms of how do we actually do it. It's grounded in the law and so forth to be able to actually make it real.
And that is what we want to do. We are here to make it real. And this time I resonate deeply with your vision of why we're here to actually make the transition this time. And so thank you so much. We'll put the links in the show note. We browsed through the 80-page document on Gemstone University. What's it called? The
Master plan.
And wow, it resonates deeply also with the thoughts that we have in here in both on the Impossible Show and on our memberhood site, Holy Land. So I just look so much forward to co-creating and being part of this journey together and follow what is coming out over the next few weeks.
Great.
Thank you so much.
One other thing on Gemstone, like I said, there's a green, I don't know if I said it in the recording, I told you earlier, a green banner. There's a little video player with a video that I did like 6 years ago. It's a little outdated, but it welcomes people to what we're doing. Underneath that is a green banner and a header, a title, Overview of the World System and Separation from Life. That's a very important document. It condenses into 153 pages how the law form and the history of everything we've touched on, how law and equity and so forth, how it really works, how status correction works. That is literally a 1-year PhD course in the world system, that one document. Anybody who's really interested to understand how we've separated from life, how we have been bonded to what I've discussed, how we can walk out of that, that's a mandatory reading.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Super.
yes, I think we've got a lot of bedtime reading for
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic to meet you, Ken.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
so
Okay.
much.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please find links and information about this episode in the show notes. And come to Holy Land to find all our podcast episodes. Holy Land is where leaders in wholeness and sovereignty meet. Holy Land, where we actively co-create whole and holy nations founded on compassion and freedom. And Holy Land is not for followers nor sheep. Join us on holyland.me. We accompany you there with Believe in You from our household musician John Century. See you in Holy Land. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, wholyland.me.